Hey, what's going on? Why are you ignoring her when she's in this state? Please, take our daughter to the hospital. When I returned from work, my 1-year-old daughter was crying abnormally. Yet my husband was watching TV, laughing loudly at a comedian's act. Leave her alone. It's not the first time she's been wailing like this. She'll quiet down eventually when she gets tired of crying. Indeed, the daughter I held in my arms seemed to have calmed down from her intense crying, perhaps due to exhaustion. But her complexion was poor, and her lips were pale and blue. I hurriedly called for an ambulance. At the hospital where we were transported, after the doctor's examination, I was told an unbelievable fact. My husband had broken his promise to me and had been secretly continuing something without telling me. When I confronted my husband, who arrived late at the hospital, he turned bright red and lashed out. Do you all enjoy ganging up on me and making me the bad guy? I was just watching her like you told me to. You didn't say to comfort her if she cried or take her to the hospital if something seemed off, did you? My husband fled from the hospital, claiming he was being unfairly blamed. Despite putting our daughter's life at risk, he showed no remorse. I decided to seek revenge. I'm a married woman in my late 20s. I met my husband through local volunteer activities. I was participating individually, but my husband was participating as part of his company's policy of regular volunteer work. My husband was able to interact with everyone without discrimination, and he was especially caring towards the elderly and young children. I was attracted to him when I saw him like that. After that, we started seeing each other more often through volunteer activities, and gradually it turned into a personal relationship. We got married after an ardent proposal from my husband. I had left my family home to go to university and didn't return to my hometown after finding a job. Since my life was centered in the city, we decided to live closer to the city even after marriage. My husband also said it would be helpful for his commute, so we enjoyed our newlywed life while maintaining a good atmosphere. I was slightly concerned that his parents' home was closer than mine, but I got along well with my in-laws. Especially my father-in-law, who had started judo when he was young and was still practicing it at 60. Actually, I had a period when I was devoted to martial arts as a child, so I got along very well with my father-in-law. Shortly after getting married, I became pregnant. A year and a half after marriage, I safely gave birth to our daughter, and we had happy days with a new addition to our family. At the time of my first childbirth, both sets of parents and my husband rushed to be there, and I felt that everyone cherished me. And I thought my daughter was lucky to have so many people eagerly awaiting her birth. I even thought that someday when my daughter grew up, I might tell her about this time. However, the happiness didn't last long. It was discovered that the savings amount and annual income my husband had shown me before marriage were false declarations. Regarding the savings, I could overlook it if we could increase it together from now on, even if he had lied out of vanity. But I wished he had been honest about his annual income. Before I took maternity leave and childcare leave, we were both working, so I didn't really notice that my husband's earnings were low. But when I stopped working to take care of our child, the reduction in my income gradually started to affect our lives. It would have been fine if it was just the two of us. But with one more family member, it became clear that we couldn't manage with my husband's low income. Children become more expensive as they grow. Thinking about that time, I couldn't afford to be relaxed, so I quit my job after waiting for our daughter to turn 1 year old. I really wanted to return to work earlier, but I couldn't find a place to leave our daughter. As a result, it took half a year to find a place to leave her. I spent days unable to shake off the guilt of working and leaving our daughter at daycare. Actually, I wanted to be a full-time housewife until our daughter entered middle school if possible, because I didn't want her to feel the same loneliness I did. My mother was also a working mother, and from as far back as I can remember, I was always left at my grandparents' house or at daycare during the day. I felt lonely, but I never resented my mother. That's because every day when she came home, she would come to see me and spend time with me no matter how tired she was. It was the same with my father. I could feel that I was very loved by both my parents. I encouraged myself, thinking that if my mother could do it, there was no reason I couldn't. Even when I came home tired or returned late due to overtime, I prioritized time with my daughter above all else and showered her with affection. My husband seemed to have a lot of free time, with no overtime or weekend work, perhaps because he was in a department with flexible hours. It seemed he could also work from home, and when I returned to work, he increased his work from home hours. I found myself increasingly relying on my husband for picking up and dropping off our daughter at daycare, but he didn't seem to mind and actively participated in childcare. I once again felt that I had made the right choice in marrying him, as he truly seemed to enjoy working for others. He even seemed to be doing volunteer work on weekends sometimes. I felt a growing desire to resume local volunteer activities myself once our daughter was a bit older. Then one day, when I returned from work and was changing our daughter's clothes, it happened. I noticed a bump on our daughter's head. It wasn't there when I dressed her this morning, so something must have happened while I was away. When I asked my husband about it, he said our daughter had hit her head on the corner of the table leg. From the size of the bump, she must have cried a lot from the pain. Moreover, you can't always tell with head injuries just by looking, so I naturally thought he would have taken her to the hospital. Going to the hospital just for bumping her head a little. That's an overreaction, my husband said with a laugh. I lost my temper in an instant and argued with my husband. Even adults are sometimes told they need a detailed examination if they hit their head, so why was my amateur husband making his own judgment? Then my husband got angry in return, saying why should he be complained at when he was taking care of her while working from home? If you're going to say that, then don't do overtime and come home for your daughter. In fact, as a mother, shouldn't you prioritize something over earning money? I wanted to say, who are you to talk, but I held back. I knew if I said that, the argument would only escalate. In the first place, there wouldn't be a problem if my husband earned more. If it's a company without overtime, he could take a part-time job in the evening, or he could switch to a better-paying company. Childcare has only just begun. We have a long way to go, but is this attitude okay? I started to feel increasingly uneasy about my husband's overly carefree way of thinking. And after this incident, I began to avoid leaving our daughter in my husband's care and tried to take care of her myself as much as possible. My company was understanding towards married women. They even tacitly allowed me to leave work temporarily sometimes. But I couldn't keep saying, "I can't do overtime," too many times. I made an effort to perfectly balance childcare and work while coordinating with the daycare where we left our daughter. After about 2 months of this lifestyle, there was a work-related funeral that I absolutely couldn't miss. An important person from a client company we were indebted to had passed away, and I had to pay my respects. It was sudden, so I couldn't arrange for holiday childcare, and I had no choice but to leave our daughter with my husband. After the previous incident when our daughter bumped her head, we had gone to the hospital together the next day and received an explanation of our daughter's symptoms. In the end, it wasn't as serious as I had worried, but the doctor who examined her gave us quite a stern warning. This time it didn't lead to anything serious, but that won't always be the case. Don't take your eyes off your daughter. Perhaps because of this, my husband seemed to have reflected quite a bit. When I asked if it was okay to leave our daughter with him this time, he said he wouldn't make the same mistake twice, so it would be fine. I trusted these words from my husband and left our daughter in his care. However, unable to shake off my worry, I contacted my husband when I arrived at the nearest station and checked again before entering the funeral venue. I couldn't help but say something, even though I thought he might get angry if I was too persistent. But this time, my husband didn't respond negatively to my persistent contact. He gently replied, "You worry too much." I told myself that my husband must be growing as a father too, and that it would be fine, and I entered the funeral venue. After attending until the departure of the coffin, I was still concerned about our daughter, so I returned home immediately. A fellow housewife employee had come by car and offered to give me a ride, which I gratefully accepted. It would be faster than returning by train. After being dropped off in front of our house, I watched the car drive away before entering the house. Then I heard our daughter crying from the direction of the living room. I hurried to the living room to find our daughter lying on her back, crying loudly. However, my husband didn't even try to comfort her and was engrossed in watching TV, occasionally letting out a laugh. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, turning off the TV my husband was watching. My husband yelled lightly, saying don't turn it off at a good part, and snatched the remote from my hand to continue watching TV. My husband, perhaps disliking my shouting voice, turned up the volume of the TV. Then gradually, our daughter's crying voice became less audible. I immediately realized that the TV volume wasn't the only cause. Our daughter's complexion was gradually worsening, and she seemed to be having difficulty breathing. "Honey, please. Get the car out right now." I could drive myself, but as a paper driver, I wasn't confident in my driving skills. Besides, the reason we hadn't gotten rid of the car even though we could barely support a family of 3 on my husband's salary alone was because I thought it would be convenient if something happened to our daughter. "She didn't hit her head today, it's just a fussy cry. Just leave her be." How can you say leave her be with this complexion? Just take us to the hospital, that's all you need to do. Alright, I got it. But I'm at a good part now, so after this is over. Our daughter's lips were already pale. I felt like her rough breathing was gradually slowing down. Judging that I couldn't wait for my husband to take action, I called for an ambulance. I prepared only the necessary things and boarded the arrived ambulance. I asked to go to the pediatric clinic where our daughter was usually seen. But because it was evening on a holiday and they weren't set up for emergency care, we had to look for a different hospital. The ambulance doesn't depart until the destination is decided. After being turned down by 2 hospitals, we finally decided on a general hospital in the neighboring city. During this time, my husband remained engrossed in the TV, showing no interest in our situation. I told him I would contact him when we reached the hospital and left for the hospital alone with our daughter. Upon arrival, the on-duty doctor performed the examination and treatment. I was honestly worried, as I had the impression that on-duty doctors were like part-time doctors. But this doctor gave a thorough examination and quick treatment. The doctor prefaced by saying it would have been quite dangerous if we had been a little later, but then said the treatment was complete and we could relax now. Upon hearing those words, I felt my knees suddenly go weak. A nurse called out to me, saying there would be an explanation from the doctor. Also, our daughter would need to stay in the hospital overnight for observation. The doctor started by explaining the conclusion first. It turned out that our daughter had accidentally ingested an electronic cigarette. Even though it was a small amount, it was too much for the body of our 1-year-old daughter to handle, and her condition had suddenly changed. The doctor asked if anyone living with us smoked, and I reflexively shook my head. That's because when I found out I was pregnant, my husband had said he would quit smoking. Since then, I hadn't seen my husband smoking. Also, there was no characteristic smell of cigarettes, so I had thought my husband was continuing to abstain from smoking. But the reality was different. He had been smoking secretly, hiding it from me. I had initially shaken my head, but I corrected myself, saying there was a possibility my husband was smoking without my knowledge. At that moment, my husband arrived at the hospital, looking weary. The moment I saw him, I couldn't help but confront him. Why did you keep secretly smoking? Even if you hide it from me, at least don't smoke in front of our daughter. Ha! What's this all of a sudden? It's fine now, isn't it? The pregnancy period is over. That's not the issue. My husband further spoke as if it was someone else's problem, saying things like, "She's fine now, so it's okay, right?" Making light of our daughter's condition. Then the doctor, who had been silent until now, raised his voice. "I have no intention of questioning why you smoke in secret from your wife. But children are interested in everything and immediately put things in their mouths. It's common sense for a father to keep things that a child might accidentally ingest out of reach." Furthermore, my husband was strongly reprimanded, being asked if he couldn't even imagine what would happen if a 1-year-old child ingested something that's said to be harmful even for adults. Why do I have to be blamed this much? This is ridiculous. My husband, perhaps embarrassed at being scolded by the doctor or feeling his pride hurt, turned bright red and became sulky. Then he ran away from the hospital. Honestly, it's not a problem if my husband isn't here. Also, I felt that our daughter might be able to sleep more peacefully without my husband, who didn't help her when she was suffering. I felt that the most important thing for me to prioritize now was not chasing after my runaway husband, but being by the side of our daughter who had endured pain in her small body. The next day, when we were examined by the pediatric doctor, it was decided that we should stay in the hospital a bit longer for observation. According to the diagnosis of the on-duty doctor, we could have been discharged, and that diagnosis wasn't wrong, but considering that I worked during the day, it would be better to stay in the hospital under complete nursing care. I returned home once to prepare for our daughter's hospitalization and contacted work to say I couldn't come in. When I got home, there was no sign that my husband had returned since then. If he had just come back home in a huff, there might have been room for reconciliation. But he didn't even feel that what he did to our daughter was wrong, and when pointed out, he got sulky and ran away from home. Is this how an adult behaves? I'm amazed that his behavior is like that of a middle school student. Right now, our daughter's complete recovery comes first, but after that, I started to strongly feel that I should divorce my husband. But even after 3 days, my husband didn't return. I searched for likely places, but I completely lost track of my husband's whereabouts. On the 5th day, feeling that I couldn't leave things as they were, I contacted my in-laws. Of course, I revealed everything about how things had come to this point. After receiving my call, my in-laws managed to find out that my husband was at least going to work, and they waited for him at his workplace. Actually, on the day my husband didn't come home, I had called his company once. But at that time, they said he hadn't come to work. I don't know if my husband had told them to say that if I called or if he really hadn't gone to work, but I was at least relieved that he was safe. Although he was a failure as an adult, as a husband, and as a father, I would have a bad conscience if he had died on the streets. Even if my husband's actions were problematic, I didn't feel good about parting on bad terms, and I thought it was cowardly to disappear without even apologizing for what he did to our daughter. Apparently, when my husband noticed my in-laws waiting for him, he tried to run away at full speed. But he couldn't escape from my mother-in-law, who apparently had a history as a track and field athlete in her student days. Furthermore, he was caught and held down by my father-in-law, who caught up with him. My husband desperately resisted, but being completely opposite to his athletic parents and fully on the cultural side, he was no match for my father-in-law. My husband's suit was in tatters when he was caught and brought back by my in-laws. In addition, since I had already reported everything about his treatment of our daughter, he was thoroughly scolded about that as well. My husband was already in a state of lost fighting spirit and was completely exhausted. Apparently, after running away from the hospital that day, my husband had gone straight to a hotel without returning home even once. He seemed to have bought changes of clothes and such there. I wanted to question where he got the money for that, but right now, the issue was his attitude towards our daughter rather than the source of his money. Weren't you worried about our daughter? Even if you didn't want to see me, didn't you think about checking with the hospital about times when I wouldn't be there and coming to visit? What's the point of an amateur like me going? It's best to leave illnesses and injuries to the doctors. That's not what I'm talking about. As a person, as a father, didn't you feel worried? I understand that there are people in the world who don't develop maternal or paternal instincts even after becoming parents, who can't embrace those feelings at all. But not even being worried as a person. What does that mean? Was my husband's enthusiasm for volunteer work just for show? I was more disappointed by the lack of human emotion in my husband than by his lack of paternal instincts. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can continue with you anymore. Let's get a divorce. Divorce? Isn't that an overreaction? It was just a small thing. Besides, it was our daughter's fault for putting it in her mouth on her own, wasn't it? It's because you didn't discipline her properly. If I could, I'd love to increase the time I spend with our daughter and slowly teach her various things. Moreover, it should be several times easier for an adult to be careful than to discipline a young child. I wanted to say it was because my husband wasn't more responsible, because his earnings were poor. But I felt I shouldn't say that. As I was feeling conflicted, wondering how to persuade him, my father-in-law, who had been silently observing our conversation, opened up. That's enough. The root cause is that you lack perseverance. As I heard it, my husband had initially worked at a company with better income than now, but he gave up due to the extreme workload and resigned, then found his current job. A company with no overtime, no business trips or transfers, and no weekend work. Apparently, he chose a company where he could use his time meaningfully rather than one where his salary would increase over the years. My in-laws said they thought I had made a brave decision to marry my husband despite his income. Now, the idea that the man should be the breadwinner of the family is outdated, and it's not bad for the one who can earn to do so, while the other takes care of the house. They thought we had married with such an agreement. This is what happens when a half-baked person tries to put on airs. Marriage means carrying the life of your partner too. If you don't have that resolve, you're not qualified to have a family. It seems my husband had been strictly disciplined by my father-in-law, as he was overwhelmed by my father-in-law's intensity and couldn't argue back. Furthermore, when told that he needed to have his spirit retrained and that if he wanted to continue married life, he would have to attend the dojo every day, my husband mumbled in a small voice, "I'll get a divorce." Apparently, the harsh treatment he received at my father-in-law's dojo during his childhood was traumatic, and he would start hyperventilating just at the sight of a martial arts uniform. He started screaming that he'd rather get divorced than experience that nightmare again, and thanks to my father-in-law's pressure, we were somehow able to proceed smoothly with the divorce. Some time after the divorce, I received a call from my ex-husband. When we divorced, we agreed that child support for our daughter would be paid in installments at the end of each month until she turned 20, rather than in a lump sum. My in-laws agreed to strictly check the payments, and so far, there have been no delays in payment. But when I received the call from my ex-husband, I thought it might be about the child support, perhaps saying that payments were becoming difficult. Actually, a colleague saw me being pinned down in a grappling hold by my dad. Apparently, it had become quite a dramatic event and was the talk of my ex-husband's workplace. My ex-husband felt humiliated by my father-in-law and confided in the colleague who saw it, saying, "It was just a small thing. but everyone made a big fuss about it. He told them about the whole incident with our daughter. He even said, "I was just watching the kid as my wife asked me to, and then I got scolded. It's such a nuisance." Indeed, I had said, "Please take care of our daughter. Make sure she doesn't fall or bump into anything." But that didn't mean just watching her, yet my husband explained that he was watching her because that's what I was told to do. However, this backfired. His colleagues said things like, "You're the worst. That's like saying you didn't chase after a thief who stole a bag you were asked to watch because you weren't told to get it back if it was taken, and you're just being perverse. Are you a kid?" Moreover, my ex-husband had spoken loudly in the company cafeteria, so the surrounding employees overheard everything. I heard rumors that he was criticized by employees who had overheard, saying he was inconsiderate. He was called in by his superior and even lectured, "What did you learn from your volunteer activities?" Now he was being viewed coldly within the company and feeling uncomfortable. It was affecting his work, and at this rate, he wouldn't be able to pay child support. He came crying to me, asking me to explain to others that he wasn't at fault, that it was just others making a big fuss. My ex-husband hadn't reflected on his actions at all. He had only agreed to the divorce and was paying child support because he didn't want to be scolded by my father-in-law. There's a possibility that when he married me, he only saw me as a good target to live an easy life. Our married life was essentially supported mostly, if not entirely, by me. You've never apologized to me or our daughter, have you? Of course, I don't remember being thanked either. Why should I listen to your request? I agreed to the divorce and child support, didn't I? What more do you want from me? Come on, please. Isn't it your turn to listen to my request now? I've been scolded plenty by my dad because of you. Listening to my ex-husband's completely unreasonable arguments was giving me a headache. I told him never to call me again about anything other than child support and hung up the phone. But he immediately called back, persistently saying, "Please." It was so annoying that I told him my father-in-law was here visiting, and my ex-husband silently stopped his persistent calls. Sometime later, I heard from my in-laws that my ex-husband had resigned from his company on his own because it had become uncomfortable to work there. My ex-husband, lacking technical skills, somehow managed to find new employment, but could only get a job with an even lower salary. He asked my in-laws for financial assistance, but my father-in-law flatly refused. When my mother-in-law suggested he could save on rent by living at home, he said he would do anything but live with my father-in-law, and he's somehow managing on his low income even now. But things apparently got tough, and he contacted me again. He said the child support payments were becoming a significant burden and asked if we could reduce the amount. Paying money for our daughter is about the only thing you can do, so do at least that much. If you really want to reduce the amount, let's talk through our lawyers. But I won't agree to a reduction even if it goes to court. I further told him that if he falls behind, I'll take him to court to collect the payments. He said paying child support would be better than paying lawyer fees, so for now, the agreed amount is being transferred on the promised date. I've returned to my parents' home and am balancing childcare and work with their help. My father said he could still work and got re-employed, working 3 days a week at the company where he worked until retirement. My mother retired before reaching retirement age for the sake of our daughter. I felt sorry for my mother who loved her job, but she said she wanted to do for our daughter what she couldn't do for me. She told me not to worry as it was just her self-satisfaction, and she's always by our daughter's side so she doesn't feel lonely. When I come home, someone is always waiting for my return. Seeing the lights of home gives me a sense of security. The family life I longed for is now right in front of me. Being able to return to my parents' home where I can entrust our daughter with peace of mind has allowed me to throw myself into work more than ever before. Although my commute time increased after moving back to my parents' home, after a while, I was assigned to a branch office near my parents' home. I still keep in touch with my in-laws. We have remote conversations and share videos of our daughter, watching over her growth together. We have only one common wish. May our daughter grow up healthy and strong.